The International Criminal Court is demanding the release of 4 staff members detained by a Libyan militia group. Is this another sign of the country's internal divisions? And does this raise more doubts about the authority of the government in Tripoli? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazm Seeker. Well, the brigade that has been holding Muammar Gaddafi's son Saif al-Islam has captured 4 members of the International Criminal Court staff who went to meet him. It is a move that highlights Libya's problem of powerful local militias and calls into question the authority of the central government. From Tripoli, Amr Saleh explains.
These are the men holding Saif al-Islam al-Gaddafi. They accuse a delegation from the International Criminal Court of espionage and endangering the security of Libya.
There were 2 documents, one inciting Saif al-Islam to demand his trial at the ICC, to say that Libya has no laws and that he is being treated badly in his prison. There was a 3-page letter from his secretary, Mohammed Ismail. We also found spying and photography equipment on a member of the delegation.
The ICC delegation arrived to Tripoli on Monday by invitation from the General Prosecutor's Office. An Australian lawyer, an interpreter and 2 other people are now being detained and are under investigation.
The Libyan judiciary is in charge of the investigation, the legal proceedings and their results. It is the only body in charge of this whole thing. Nobody else has the right to interfere.
Saif al-Gaddafi was captured by a Zintan rebel brigade in the south of Libya last year. The ICC charged him with crimes against humanity during the uprising and demanded Libya hand him over to The Hague. But Libya wants to try him on its soil and is promising a fair trial. Neither the ICC nor Libyan leaders have managed to convince the Zintan brigade to turn in its big catch.
The latest developments will only reinforce Zintan's suspicions. If Saif al-Islam Gaddafi is handed over to Tripoli or anywhere else, his chances of escape would increase. That's why they want to try him at this court, because they say it's more reliable and secure. Amr Saleh, Al Jazeera, Zintan.
Well, this episode is seen as another blow to the interim government in the run-up to general elections. Tribal clashes in the southeast have cost more than 250 lives since February. On Saturday, fresh clashes erupted in the remote southeastern town of Kufra between Libyan soldiers and tribesmen. 2 people were killed and several injured there. And last Monday, armed rebels stormed the airport runway, forcing it to shut down for several hours. The armed group were angry over the arrest of their commander. And last month, 1 person was killed and several injured when militiamen started shooting outside the Libyan Prime Minister's office. So all of this begs the question then, who really runs Libya? Well, to help us answer that question and more, we hope, we're joined by our guests in Doha, Wahid Burshan. He's a former NTC member and an independent candidate for the Libyan parliamentary elections. In London, Saad Jabbar joins us. He's an international lawyer and political analyst. And in Rabat, we have William Lawrence, director of the North Africa Project for the International Crisis Group. He was formerly in charge of U.S.-Libya relations at the U.S. State Department. Good to have you all with us. Saad Jabbar in London, I want to start with you, and I want to start with the these ICC staff members who are being held in Zintan right now. The militia there that's holding them are saying they want to make sure that Saif al-Islam stays in Libya and is dealt with by the Libyan justice system. Do you think that is the right way forward, given the current situation in the country right now?
Well, the way it is presented, it is not good at all, because I think these people or the lawyers should have been protected and not to be harassed for any reason. And if there was any suspicion about them, I would like to see what what documents represented or constituted a threat to national security. I mean, I don't doubt that the Zintan revolutionaries wanted to make sure that Saif al-Islam would remain in their hands. And so far, they have proved to be more responsible people in not allowing anyone to, let's say, take him away or smuggle him out of the country. And they had bad experience before, because one of the lieutenants of Gaddafi called Bashir Saleh, although he was given to some officials in Libya, but he was able to escape to France or through French help.
Bill Lawrence, what do you think this latest episode says about the current divisions in the country? Because these four people, the members of the International Criminal Court, entered the country with the permission of the central government in Tripoli. Then they went to Zintan, and they're now being held there, we understand, against their will. What does this say about the current situation in Libya right now?
The current situation in Libya is one of distrust between, for example, the authorities in Zintan and the authorities in Tripoli. There's been a strong feeling among the Zintanis for some time that if Saif was rendered to those that would hold him in custody in Tripoli, that he would be aided to escape. Most of the Libyan protagonists in this drama are sincere. And they really have the interest of having a good trial and consistent with the Rome Statute and progressing politically. And what's happening right now is you have these new power centers and there's a negotiation going on. And part of what's going on here is the negotiation about where Saif will be tried and by whom.
Wahid Bouchan, how much power does the NTC really have in Libya beyond the capital, Tripoli?
No, of course they have the full power, the full authority, the full trust of the Libyan people. I think there may be a misunderstanding of what this situation is all about. Clearly there's something happened when this particular lawyer found out, or they found out that she had some interesting, let's call it interesting things in her belongings, whether some kind of writings, whether some devices, whatever. I heard Mr. Jahani, which is Mr. Ahmed Jahani, that I know myself personally, very trustworthy individual. He did confirm that there was something that she had in her belongings. And so we have to wait for the investigation to understand. I understand there's a committee coming down from the ICC, another group of lawyers to check the circumstance. I don't think this is sort of like really indicative of what the way you defined it, the differences in the country, the divisiveness in the country. I think it's an isolated situation. The NTC has the full authority over Libya and over Mr. Saif al-Gaddafi. And I'm sure going through the process, making sure that everything is in place, he will be tried fairly, and I'm sure the Libyan people will speak to that. But in terms of overall situation, I don't think it's really says one way or another about what's happening. Libya is going through transition. Libya is going through people in contentions in terms of their aspirations and their, in terms of facilitating their own powers and so on and so forth. But that's a different subject. I think the ICC situation is isolated.
All right, well, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the things that have led up to this and led to people questioning just how unified Libya is right now. There are hundreds of militia groups in the country. They fought against Gaddafi, and many of them don't want to put down their weapons. It is estimated there were about 250,000 militia fighters during the war. Now, in the east, the groups have united and formed a regional army which wants semi-independence. The transitional government in Tripoli is trying to merge all the militias into a national army. One of the strongest groups is the Zintan Brigade that we mentioned earlier. They captured Muammar Gaddafi's son, Saif al-Islam, and are still holding him. They used to control the airport, but in April they handed it over to the authorities. Now, Libya's militias are still competing for power, and this time the challenge comes from the Al-Awfiya Brigade. So let's talk about some of that a little bit more now. And Wahid Bouchan, if I can turn back to you on this. I know you've just said that you don't think this latest incident is indicative of any divisions in Libya at the moment. But some of the things that we just mentioned there about the different militia groups and the other incidents that have happened, wouldn't that indicate to you that there's a lot more work here to be done as far as restoring stability and any sort of unity to the country?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. It is verge of chaotic, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, there's no. I mean, it's clearly that Libya is not together yet. It's clearly in a transition, and hopefully it's its way to statehood. What's happening right now in a weak NTC, weak authority throughout the nation, no army, no centralized security apparatus in place. Clearly people feel insecure, whether people as individuals or as regions.
Well, who should they blame for that insecurity? Do you think the Transitional National Council is to blame for how divided and fragmented the country is right now?
Well, of course they take the bulk of responsibility, but it's really natural. This is just the process of going that we're going through. I think once we get to the elections, we will look back on this and say, yes, it was normal, it was really great. You know, there's things here and there. You know, people are feeling insecure. They don't have a state. What would you expect in any country? You know, people, when they see a weak government, they keep arms, they try to protect themselves. And I think all in all, under the situation, they're doing great. Clearly, the political differences and the political discourse with the armaments around, you know, people feel insecure. But when you see it in a big picture, we really have done a good job as Libyans, you know, trying to protect and trying to focus on the next step, which is the election.
Bill Lawrence, were these tribal and regional divisions that are now emerging in a post-Gaddafi Libya, was this perhaps inevitable?
It was inevitable, and it existed before the revolution was over. In many ways, the flare-ups and these various conflagrations between groups happened from February 2011 onward. And after Tripoli fell in August and the war effectively ended in October, the fault lines between various communities, whether it was the Misratans with Tuarega or Zwara and their neighbors, Zintanis and others, those fault lines remained, but there was fighting both before and after the end of the revolution. The good news lately is that there's increasing coordination among militias. So, for example, recently the airport incident, you know, various militias, as still happens, go in, and they coordinated in an effective way. And I should also point out that the Zintanis have been leading what you might call conflict resolution, leading to ceasefires and a certain degree of reconciliation involving many of these conflicts around Libya. So the people are attempting to do the right thing. It's just that there isn't much of an authority in place that can do this at this time.
Saeed Jabbar, 42 years of dictatorship and months more after that of armed conflict. Was it realistic to expect a unified country at this stage?
Well, there are two things. The militias themselves, the armed groups, I talked to some of them. I found especially the original revolutionaries, because the problem is not with those groups who fought and brought down Gaddafi and they coordinated their work with the outside world as well. The problem is some militias, opportunistic elements which emerged after the downfall of Gaddafi. They set up themselves in business, and those are now the main source of trouble. And the good news is that the main or the original armed groups who fought Gaddafi are now dealing with those opportunistic elements in a very, very responsible manner, discussing, negotiating with them. If they didn't comply, they fight them. And the second point here is that what I found very, very surprising is that although the Libyan revolution started on the basis of a coalition between internal forces and the outside forces, you know, the United States, Britain, France, Italy, and so on, how come these forces did not sit down after the collapse of Gaddafi and the declaration of the end of the Gaddafi regime, and they drew up a roadmap working together, firstly to create a national sort of force of law and order, call it the army, call it police, or whatever. Nothing happened of that kind. And secondly, however symbolic and important the National Transitional Council was during the revolution and thereafter, and its respect, it became a symbol for, you know, the central authority, but they honestly did not show that they were effective in terms of the various essential organs of the state, including police and the army. And that's what the only sector which started to work very quickly was the oil. That's what made some people, wonder whether there was some sort of conspiracy theory here. However, the good news is also what we have seen in the elections in Benghazi. The elections which have resulted in a good result, and it happened in the most peaceful manner. I hope that could be repeated nationally. But, as I said before, the militia leaders, when you speak to them, or the armed groups, I spoke to some of them, I had the opportunity to meet some of them abroad, and they told me, look, we have lock and key, and we know where our weapons are, we know where all the arsenal is, we know who is guarding what. If there is a national central power which we trust, we will pass.
Let's talk a little bit more. Let's talk a little bit more about the upcoming elections elsewhere in the country. And I want to put this to you, Wahid Borshad, because obviously you have a stake in this because you are running in upcoming parliamentary elections. But critics have said that in Libya, voting so soon after the fall of Gaddafi has the danger of undermining democracy because of the hastily designed process, the fact that some institutions right now are basically non-existent, and those institutions are what's needed to facilitate the whole election process. Is this really the right time to be holding elections?
Oh, definitely it's the right time. Essentially, what we have in our place here is that what the gentlemen were talking about, weak NTC. This is something we cannot tolerate for another month. I mean, we're basically holding our breath just to kind of get to the point where we get an election and we get a properly elected body, a representative of the people, who will be able to be empowered and execute or produce institutions such as the Prime Minister, maybe a presidential body, and obviously work on the Constitution. So we definitely need to get into the process of an election. By the way, it's not a parliamentary election. This is a National Assembly election where they'll be able to start working on creating and be truly empowered, and be hopefully that empowerment can translate to stronger army and security forces.
Can you say with any certainty when those elections will take place? Because we're hearing conflicting information right now. The last we heard was that they were supposed to take place on June 19th. Now we're hearing that could be put back to about a month. What are you hearing?
I'd like to know myself. I was just on the phone here trying to check with my office to what they heard. They're supposed to be.
Doesn't that in itself say something about the current situation in Libya?
No. Actually, no, it's not. We're very, very confident. We're very, very happy about what's happening. In half an hour, we will know exactly the date. Actually, we've been asking for that. Most of the people and the election process speaks to the fact that there's an overwhelming numbers of people who wants to be elected, and the 5,000 people go through a process to clean them up, basically, and to produce the election list. That's taking a lot of time. I think one thing we may see, or maybe we think is happening on the ground, is some forces from the old regime trying to frustrate the process, and they're putting their name haphazardly like that just to delay. But that's just guesswork. There's no facts on the ground speaks to that. But you know what? In any election process, in any country, especially a country that we go like ours, we go through some of these issues. It is a technical issues, nothing to it. We are extremely happy about the process.
Let's get Bill Lawrence's view on this, and I want to ask you if one particular faction in Libya doesn't accept these election results for any reason, what's to stop them from taking up arms again?
Well, there's various threats about groups taking up arms that don't agree with the elections. There was just a protest recently in Benghazi of Islamists, 300 Islamists that are against the elections. There's other groups in the east that don't seem to be fully compliant. But I'd like to address the central question here, which is that politically, Libya needs elections now. Culturally, administratively, there might need to be a delay of a couple of weeks. My biggest concern about elections is that most ordinary Libyans don't know who the candidates are and don't know who they stand for. On the positive side, the diversity and quality of the candidates is very good, and they've run good elections in Misrata, Benghazi, so they can do it. And I think if certain groups are recalcitrant and aren't involved in the elections, that's okay as long as the bulk of Libyans are in favor of them. There's, of course, the other issue that Benghazins don't feel like they were adequately represented, that 109 of the 200 seats, I believe, go to the Tripolitanian area, and so there's some representativity issues. But I agree with the previous speaker. Let's get these elections done. It's important for all of these other problems that we've been addressing.
Do you think, I mean, let me put this back to you, Waheed Bouchane. Do you think once the election process has been completed, do you expect things to calm down a bit by then?
Oh, very much so. I know for a fact, and this happened before the election of Mr. Abdul Rahim, when things kind of pan out and there's some clarity to the environment, people settle down and line up themselves and go back to their normal life. I believe wholeheartedly that when that happens, election, things will start streaming down and be calmed down.
Saad Jabbar, what about this idea of a loose federal system of government in Libya? Do you think that may be the way forward as well?
I think there is a consensus now amongst Libyans that the united Libya is more important than the federation or confederation. I think that was a premature proposal. You cannot suggest that before the Constituent Assembly, which is going to draft the constitution, electoral laws, and I think that should really be put on the back burner and allow the elected body, the sovereign body, which is elected by the people, to decide on the form of state they are going to have. I mean, that argument, by the way, existed during since the independence of Libya in 1951. There were people who were in favor of a unitary system. There were others who were in favor of a federal system. I think that should be left to the stage where the people who are elected by the people themselves to decide on that issue, not to have one group in Benghazi deciding something. And that proposal was rejected by the majority of the people, especially in terms of timing and circumstance. I would like to come back to the issue of the trial itself of Gaddafi's regime, and I hope the Libyans really, they are too traumatized, they are too burdened with so many issues which are of priority to the people, from security to utilities to other matters. Libya is the richest country in the area, and Libyan society is usually run by, when you go down to the masses, to the people in society, they are run by consensus. Although we hear about militias fighting each other, but they are always settled. That's why I don't agree with people who are not optimistic on the future, about the future of Libya. However, the trial should not happen or take place like that in Iraq.
I want to put the question. I want to put the question I asked. I just asked you back to Bill Lawrence now. What about this idea of a looser, more federalized Libya? Do you think that is the way forward?
Yes and no. Obviously, it's up to the Libyan people to decide and their elected representatives. But whether or not there's a de jure federal system written into law, or a de facto federal system with some decentralization of power, will have some kind of federalism in Libya, in part because before Gaddafi, after the revolution, there's a history here of fairly decentralized governance in Libya. Don't forget that the previous regime system was a system of local government. And so I think it's unlikely for a lot of the militias to turn in their arms immediately after elections, but the elections will help with all of these problems we've been talking about disarming and reintegrating the militias into the new army and the security services. But I would also add that some division of labor between the outlying areas and the center needs to happen. Tripoli has long worked in opaque ways for the rest of the country, and they're going to sort of have to earn their credibility again. And in the meantime, I'm sure we're going to see challenges within this transitional system, and also probably outside of the political transition that's going on against Tripoli.
It'll be fascinating to see how all of this does transpire, but that is going to have to be the last word. Thank you to all three of our guests. In Doha, Waheed Bouchane; in London, Saad Jabbar; and in Rabat, William Lawrence. Thanks very much for your time. That's it for this edition of Inside Story. Remember, if you want to send us your feedback, just email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Hazem Seeker. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.